Hey, Dr. John Finn here. Welcome to the Habit Mechanic podcast. Right now, you can get my new best-selling book, Train Your Brain for the AI Revolution, at tougherminds.co.uk. The digital book, audiobook, and physical book are all available at a special price that you won't find anywhere else.
This week on the Tougher Minds podcast, we're discussing a major national education survey. We're joined once again by Tougher Minds founder and managing director, Dr. John Finn. And I'm also delighted to say we're joined this week by Professor Jim McKenna from Leeds Beckett University and, of course, a consultant to Tougher Minds. Gentlemen, welcome to you both. We'll hear from you in a few moments' time, but I think it's appropriate to give a brief overview for anyone who's not familiar with the survey we're talking about. The University of Portsmouth have been commissioned to undertake a national study. It'll start in September, so the start of a new academic term, I suppose. And the study is aiming to investigate if children who are taught that they can influence their own brain development and intelligence achieve more than those who don't. And I'm quoting there in that last few words specifically from the survey itself. The theory that underpins this is known in many circles as growth mindset and originates from a Stanford University academic, Carol Dweck. John, I know you've studied this, and the theory in some ways, in many ways, is a component of Tougher Minds programs. This specific study that Portsmouth University is going to undertake will involve showing the subjects, the children, films featuring actors who are going to play historical figures who are well known for their excellence and achievement, people like Albert Einstein, and these actors are going to talk in terms that could be regarded as showing that they've demonstrated a growth mindset in their careers and their achievements. And apparently there are also going to be lesson plans specifically to support that, and some other classroom materials as well, all part of the study. And then the results, the key stage 2 test results of the children who have received and participated in this study will be compared with a control group. So that is an overview of the parameters, I suppose, of the survey into what many people regard as growth mindset. John, first of all, if I can ask you, what's your reaction to this, that now that we see somebody going into the sector, as it were, and seeking to test these theories in this way?
I think there's a positive element to it. There's other data out there which shows the positive impact of growth mindset type interventions. But I fear that what's been described there isn't actually going to go the whole hog in helping young people to take control of their lives. You know, mindset is a belief system, and it's great to see role models and people who've been very successful talking about how they've achieved. But there's a big difference between believing that persisting with setbacks is good for you and being able to actually do it. So I think we've spoken before on Tougher Minds podcast about, the need to, have a belief system which might be connected to growth mindset that you can keep getting better. You need triggers then to keep reminding you of that, so that could be done in the marking scheme. It could be done in the classroom. My fear is a lot of triggers in education are not growth mindset, they're fixed mindset. We tell kids quite early that they're either good at something or they're not. But the most important thing behind belief system, contributing to, first of all, having a belief system and then triggers, is skills. Teaching simple and practical skills that I can deploy to help me to keep persisting when it's difficult. As we're speaking, we're actually just south of Aberdeen, working with PhD students from Robert Gordon's University, and we're explicitly teaching these young people skills that they can use to keep persisting. Just believing it is not enough.
Jim, is that a view you'd share?
Yeah, I think one of the concerns even expressed by Carol Dweck is the idea that people have worked out what the right answer is when you fill in a questionnaire about growth mindset. And her apprehension is that very many areas of work are now governed by what she calls a false positive mindset or growth mindset. So it's that people have learned how to pretend to be the good guy. And in previous work, we've talked about the psychology of the good guys. Most people have worked out what that is, but they can't own up to being what they're really like. And so the questionnaire doesn't really represent how they actually are. And that's a challenge, however we do it.
Yeah. So, John, you would say, and I think Jim's touched on it there, that it's not just enough to have a growth mindset, as that particular theory's called, or a similar type of perspective which shares the same outlook. You must have, to accompany that and to support it, a mechanism to deliver it in your life, I suppose.
Sure. Better grades will result from better learning habits. Children understanding how they learn, first of all, and then having a set of skills that they can use to learn more efficient and effectively. I think all too often mindset is portrayed as a magic intervention. If you just get this mindset, whoa, your life is going to set on fire, you're going to be fantastic. Getting better at things is not magic. It takes, according to Anders Ericsson's work, an average 10,000 hours of deliberate practice, or a lot of deliberate practice to get better at something. So just the belief system by itself, I just don't see it working. It's a false pursuit.
Jim, in your work, both with Tougher Minds and in the academic sector, I believe you've looked at human behaviour in detail, and would you say then that the scenario John's just described manifests itself in all walks of life, not just young people, not just school children?
Yeah, this is very important because it's how anyone might secure a growth mindset is very important, because it gives you a sense of overall meaning about how the world is, or how your world is, and so that there's positivity in that. The sense that you may have more control, for example, goes with a growth mindset. This idea that within Tougher Minds also we talk about big, hairy, audacious goals. Well, having a growth mindset would help you to say, well, I need to work hard to achieve that. So there's a sense in that. Yet there's more to it, because the inherent issue here is that you acquire a mindset, whether it's a growth or a fixed mindset, according to the behaviours you encounter. So when we look at a sister concept called motivational climate, that is, how do I get my rewards in a given situation? We see that people are highly responsive, boys, girls, adults, etc., across the life cycle. They're highly responsive to the ways in which they're rewarded and the ways in which they're punished. And so what this does is it shifts attention possibly away from the children to the growth mindsets they're depicting, to what it is that's produced that mindset. And that's much more important. And that places attention now on teachers and parents.
And I think it might be useful for people to understand as well. You talked, Jim, in a video on the Tougher Minds website, which is there for people to look at. And by all means, people should go to tougherminds.co.uk and have a look. Plenty of free resources to download, actually, which will help you understand more about what Tougher Minds does. But in this video, Jim, you talk about the biology of the brain, and I suppose why the theory John and yourself are now describing, why they operate and why they function. Just for anyone who's not yet had an opportunity to understand more about that, just cover that for us if you would, because I think it's useful for people to know.
Yeah, what we're talking about, when we have any kind of mindset is attitude, and really that's a lot to do with how you're thinking at the time. So a lot of the Tougher Minds work is really about getting your prefrontal cortex to work. That's the thinking part of your brain, to think ahead, to anticipate, to think about the future, and then to deploy skills which are going to help you to work through that. So if you think, how's that fit with growth mindset? A growth mindset helps you to think that there's a positive future ahead. It doesn't tell you what else to do. Tougher Minds then picks up on that and gives you the skills to operationalize that, to realize that actually you do have a positive future and you can make it even better if you work hard. So it's that kind of set of work. But within the neurobiology, we see that people with a growth mindset, their brain activity is different to people with a fixed mindset. There's a lot more brain activity taking place in the prefrontal cortex. But when you've got more skills to deploy while being positive, you get even more brain use. So that's a much more powerful learning instrument. So we would talk about Hebb's law, which is a thing called what wires together fires together in terms of brain activity. The more meaningful it is, the more resources you deploy to make things happen in that moment, the better your brain development.
And John, I'll be coming to you in a moment just to ask you to outline, you spoke a moment ago about the simple and practical interventions that Tougher Minds has developed and uses successfully with schools and all sorts of other organisations besides. But Jim, just to explain again for anyone who's perhaps a little unfamiliar with it, these phenomena have been observed using what you might commonly known as a brain scan. Is that right?
Yeah, these are scans of brains in action, so they're called functional magnetic resonance imaging. So if anyone's ever had a head injury or something like that, and you go into one of these very noisy tubes where they're taking pictures of your brain, well, what's happening here is there's lots of scanners being used to look at young people as they try to solve problems, etc. So that's what the functional means. You're doing a task while in the scanner. And so you can see the difference with people who've come up with a different mindset or a different training experience or whatever it might be. That will tell you the difference or the effect that a particular type of training has had over another. And
they do that presumably by, I don't know, observing some sort of electrical impulse that's going on, and they can spot the difference and spot the pattern. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So with a magnetic resonance imager, you're trying to measure the oxygen that's being used at different sites in the brain, and the implication being that the more oxygen being used, the colour that you see in the printout would change, and that's an indication that that part of the brain is being used. Since we know what that part of the brain, or we think we know what that part of the brain is doing, you can see there's more of this characteristic being deployed in this problem-solving scenario than if you come up with a different kind of training or a different experience. But it does come with a warning that a lot of this imaging is still very early in our understanding of it. But nevertheless, it fits with the kind of the validity of the arguments that are being made, that they do have a sense of coherence, they do fit together quite nicely. And so conceptually it makes sense, and evidentially it makes sense, but there may be more to it that we just don't know just yet.
Well, it's certainly interesting for people to understand that the means of analysis, if you like, anyway. And funnily enough, there was something in the news today that I noticed about people who'd suffered from mental illnesses like depression, and I think they were benefiting from some sort of talking therapy. And indeed, a measurement of that type you've just described was being employed by the medical profession to measure its effectiveness. So certainly a growing phenomenon. John, you've spoken that you have a qualified welcome then for this study and the idea of testing growth mindset. But also then Tougher Minds has established different and more delivery methods for cementing not only the right mindset but the right habits within people for the educational success and life success. In the study they're going to be measuring the effectiveness of a film, but tell us more, if you would, about how Tougher Minds goes about its work.
Well, obviously we work within business, within sport, within education. Since this is an educational example, let's think of a relevant educational program for Tougher Minds. So recently we engaged in the first phase of a program at a state school in Bradford, where we were working with GCSE pupils, and these are boys who the school felt would underachieve at GCSE compared to their potential. And one of the first things that we wanted to get the boys to understand was that their brain can change, they can get better if and practice and work and persistence is the vehicle to doing that. So that's fine. As we've gone through the program, we've then deliberately taught the boys how they learn, how they can learn more effectively, how they can concentrate more effectively, how they can manage confidence, how they can do that more effectively, how they can motivate themselves and how they can do it more effectively. And we've given them a deliberate set of skills that they can deploy that actually goes much further beyond them just believing that they can get better. They then subsequently report, and their parents report, and their teachers report. These boys are using these skills to get better at the subjects they're sitting exams for at GCSE. Not only are they using the skills, their mock/test papers that they're sitting are progressively getting better and better and better, to the extent they're getting, right now, they're a half a grade improvement per subject for each of the GCSEs they're sitting, compared to where their peers might be, and to where they were at before they had this intervention. They would not have got there just by having an understanding about a mindset, a growth mindset. They need the skills as well. And I don't see that other interventions are teaching those skills. Watching a video about Charles Darwin and understanding that he persisted isn't teaching explicit skills that pupils can then go and use. And it's almost treating learning and getting better as if it's magic. It's not magic. You have to, it's a neurobiological process where you have to pay close attention to the thing you want to get better at in order to get better at it. And that isn't easy. It's difficult to do, so you need skills, which hopefully become habits.
Yes, and those habits which you've described, I understand, have resulted in some what some people might regard as miraculous phenomena of young people taking pretty direct action to do things like manage distractions that might put them off doing the homework.
Yeah, one boy reported packing up his Xbox and putting it in the loft. And that's because he's now skilled at self-watching, being able to set goals, and more importantly, being able to deploy plans which allow him to achieve the goal that he's set. This is taught. He can do that because he's been taught explicitly how to do it, not how to pack his Xbox up, but how to manage his behaviour. So yeah, we see it in action. We've seen it now over a long period of time that we've been using these interventions in education.
Jim, what does science tell us about? John mentioned a key phrase there, self-watching. What does science tell us about how powerful that can be? Because I know it's something that is regularly referred to when we have these discussions on the Tougher Minds podcast, and I understand it's something that underpins a lot of Tougher Minds programs. So how essential is it, I suppose?
But self-watching is one of the 4 central tools that humans have for making any kind of change that they will sustain. So it's self-watching could be anything from rating your performance in a particular setting. So a boy might make a score for how well he did in his French lesson, anything for a short period like that, or it could be over a longer period where how did I do in terms of concentration over a day, over a week, anything of that sort. And then you maintain records. And the value of the record is to, one, determine your patterns, so if you can see any patterns, but also to use it as a record of success. Because we know that the brain chemical associated with success is dopamine. And when you read over your successes, you're reliving those successes, which means dopamine is being released. And what dopamine also does, which most people don't recognize, is that it's your brain's save button, which is to say, I achieved 9 out of 10 for concentration across all my lessons this week. Well done, Jim. Do that again next week. Save it because it's important, and that gives you success. That's really vital when we look at self-watching, and we need to encourage it a lot more. The challenge is that it takes time and it competes with other behaviours. And that's one of the really important things that we need to generate with all this sort of work, is to create time for the scale of self-watching that really helps everybody to do better.
And John, I think the programme at the school you described was a relatively short one, just over a matter of months. But you've seen this behaviour of self-watching being adopted fairly readily, I understand, and using a specific tool that Tougher Minds has developed.
Yeah, so we have the performance planner, different versions of that for different clients. but it's been purposely designed to help people to watch themselves and important things like the sleep, the diet, the exercise, but then also be able to deploy plans around shifting their behaviour, shifting their habits to become more helpful. And we see children as young as the top of primary schools engaging in that self-watching process, in a beneficial way. And that people talk about independent learners. This is what independence is about. It's being able to watch yourself and manage yourself. And all too often, the education system is too passive. It's children having. I think our head of education, Andrew Foster, talks about, it's like children go into a classroom and it's like getting their hair cut by somebody else. It's a passive process. We want to teach children to cut their own hair, and that means that they need to increase their self-awareness, their self-watching, but we also need to teach them explicit skills that allow them to manage themselves, to regulate their emotions, to deploy self-control. These things that seem to be central to health, happiness, and high performance in the 21st century.
Yeah, just possibly worth pointing out for anyone who perhaps fast forwarded the podcast to the 20-minute point, and we're not talking about hairdressing lessons here. That was very much an extended metaphor. So I'm sure you'll go back and listen to that if you did do that. But no, fascinating stuff, gentlemen. If I can ask you to cast your minds forward then to the outcome of the survey that we started off talking about. It may not be something you feel you can comment on, but the survey is going to take in around 6,000 pupils, we understand, in about 100 schools. Do you have any expectations of what the outcomes might be, notwithstanding the fact that from a Tougher Minds perspective, it's an interesting development, but not by any means an adequate way of assessing certain types of interventions in education. But do you nevertheless have any thoughts about how it might pan out? John, start with you.
I would imagine it will have some positive impact, but I don't think that we're doing young people justice by just introducing to the idea of a growth mindset. So my experience is that telling young people that they can change and showing that at a neurobiological level is a light bulb moment for lots of children. But what we're interested in is prolonged change, not just something that's going to have a short-term impact. So I think we'll see a positive impact. I'd question how meaningful that impact will be to young people's lives in their future, in the long-term future.
And Jim, is that something you'd go along with?
Yeah, I think the existing evidence in relation to growth mindset is positive, so that explains why it's interesting. People want to be associated with something positive. I think the challenges really lie in where do these positive growth mindsets come from? What are the activating behaviours that children experience that make the difference? So that relates to parental behaviours, peer behaviours, and teacher behaviours. And I'm not clear that the study is going to address that, and I don't know if that was its purpose. But for me, that's what it's really all about. Because if growth mindset is so advantageous, we need to be looking at what skills we need to be teaching parents, other children, so they become helpful partners, and also the parents to make sure that more children get into that helpful scenario. But John's entirely right about this skill set that we really got to understand that once you've got a growth mindset, you're only at the start line. You're not really in the race yet. There's a lot more to do, and we shouldn't be satisfied with just generating a growth mindset. There's a lot more to do because everybody who works hard and everybody who tries hard doesn't always get there because they're not using the best skills for themselves.
Yeah, and on the subject of the best skills, you just alluded to another two sets of people in the process, the parents and the teachers. And John, it's probably worth stressing and emphasising that in the intervention you've just described in the school in Bradford, and indeed in all other Tougher Minds work, you very much do involve both the teaching staff in an appropriate way and the parents as well.
Yes, and it's not light touch. It's not just saying, "Oh, we did some work with the parents." So, for example, in our bite-sized school program that we just launched actually, and schools are signing up for, there is a very strong parent training element throughout the year. It's not a one hit. It's about engaging parents constantly, or regularly rather, to make sure that they're not just hearing and understanding a message, they're actually enacting it at home and reinforcing, growth mindset and also skills. We've had some parents in our audience today, in fact, parents who are doing PhDs, already reporting, right, I'm going to make sure that when I get home on Friday, that the kids and myself and my wife, we're putting our phones away at bedtime and we're putting them in a central place. And we're not going to let them have a detrimental effect on our sleep, because he's just had the insight into how powerful and important sleep is for human functioning, for health, happiness, and performance. So yeah, it's just educating the children isn't enough. We need to educate the people who provide the daily triggers for them, as well.
And that positive response from a parent, obviously, in this different context you've described, is not unusual, is it? To understand, you do get some very, very enthusiastic responses from parents who actually find a dividend in their own lives as well from undertaking the training.
Yeah, because these are skills for life. They're not just about in the educational context. They're not just about learning things at school. We're teaching people how to deal with setbacks and challenges in their lives. And 21st century life is full of setbacks and challenges that can have a negative impact on your health, your happiness, and your performance. Parents report feeling guilty when they come to our parents' sessions, that they take away more for themselves than they do for their parenting. They talk about using their planner on their way into the city in London, or going into work in Bradford. So we know that if we get the parents excited and using these skills and the sort of the shared language that we have at Tougher Minds, then the impact can be very, very powerful. In fact, I was chatting to a headmaster earlier today who came to a couple of our programs, and he was saying how amazed, first of all, he was at the boys' reaction, but then also how amazed he was at the parental reaction, and actually how genuinely excited they were about the success they'd had in deploying these strategies, but also how they were excited about sort of trying the new things that they'd learned in that particular session. Very experienced headmaster who's, I guess, worked with thousands and thousands of parents, saying he'd never seen reactions like this before. So I think it's very, very interesting.
It certainly sounds like a fascinating moment in time for education, and we will certainly follow the outcome of this new study with great interest, but also in the knowledge that Tougher Minds is forging ahead in this important sector of education and doing great work as well. Gentlemen, just before we go, we're coming to the close of the podcast. Just a quick word then about your presence up in the northeast of Scotland at Robert Gordon University. I think it's something, John, that Tougher Minds did last year. Just give us a brief overview of your work there right at this moment.
Yeah, so we've been invited back up by Robert Gordon University to work with a group of about 30 PhD students, pupils working in pharmacology, in gas and oil sector, and the program leaders of the PhD program have recognised that some of their students, they're lacking some of these self-control skills that we've identified, and they want to give their guys the best chance of developing the best research they can and developing the best careers they can. So they've decided to put on a residential program where we upskill students and staff as well come along in our program. And today, this afternoon, Professor Jim McKenna has been just introducing the importance of looking after your brain. Really, it might sound quite obvious, but we don't do it particularly well in the Western world. And the importance of sleep, diet, and exercise. the importance of that at a neurochemical level, but also showing them simple and practical skills that they can use to get better at watching themselves and building better sleep diet and exercise habits. You know, we're dealing with very intelligent people, but yet they don't necessarily do. And by and large, from the reaction, that they don't do these things particularly well. You know, and by not doing them well, they're hindering their ability to be successful in their chosen sort of career pathways.
And Jim, I take it you've had a decent reception and a keen reception this afternoon.
Yeah, well, I think one of the interesting features for me was that we had a number of people who came back after last year because they felt like they picked up a lot of the messages, but were coming back for a bit of reinforcement and see if there was anything new. So I think about a third of the group was in that situation. The group engaged really interestingly with some of the challenges that were presented, spoke very sensibly, but actually reflected many of the challenges that we see across the educational spectrum. You know, they're not that much different to the boys at Colf School or the boys in Bradford. They're having similar difficulties.
Well, gentlemen, it's great to talk to you. Thanks for your time once again. Another Tougher Minds podcast comes to a close. Don't forget, if you want to know more about Tougher Minds, please do visit the website, tougherminds.co.uk. There are a number of free resources you can download there to understand more about how Tougher Minds can help you and the power of Tougher Minds programs. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to producing another podcast very soon.
Thanks for listening to the Habit Mechanic podcast. If you liked it, please subscribe and tell someone else about one of the ideas or insights that you found most interesting.